Welcome to Stories from the Center of the Universe, the podcast about the human experience.
Erik Kleinsmith, welcome to the Center of the Universe.
Hey, thank you for having me, Paul. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I guess I should mention you and I connected through Pete A. Turner.
Yes.
And I guess I should emphasize the A because that makes him unique.
Right. Well, yeah. Pete and I go back, I think 25 years now. Good Lord. It's been a long time since Bosnia. So 26 years. There we go.
Yeah. Bosnia, late 90s. Did you enjoy that tour?
I did, except that it was more of a culture shock for me because up until that time, my entire time in the Army had been in combat arms units. So I started as an M1 tank platoon leader in Fort Carson, Colorado. Did 2 years of that, and then in the same battalion was the battalion scout platoon leader, and it was 10 open top Humvees, no doors, no windshields, no tops. Total desert rats. Which is great in the desert, but in the mountains of Colorado and it's just totally different atmosphere when it's snowing on you. But and even after I switched from an armor to intelligence, I went straight back to an infantry battalion and was the intel officer for 1st Battalion, 6th Infantry, and then 3rd Brigade, 3 ID in Vilseck, Germany. So when I joined the unit in Bosnia to take command of the counterintelligence company, it was my first intel unit, and it was a complete culture shock to me. And
you were a commander.
Yes.
Oh man, company command is enough of a shock, but that
right.
cast of characters in that unit, I can fully imagine.
Well, I mean, it's and I know folks from the military. It's like if you've ever had to command over 20 warrant officers, you know what you're dealing with. And there's some folks like, man, I can't even deal with one.
That number of warrant officers is equivalent to like 13 CSM.
Over 4 of them is considered a conspiracy by definition. So
absolutely. I don't think I've been in the presence of more than 3 or 4 at any given time.
Oh my gosh. It's like herding cats. And the thing is there's 2 types. What I found is there's warrant officers who, just from a personality standpoint, I mean, they're all professionals. I had 15 months in command. I never gave out a single UCMJ or non-judicial punishment to anybody. I mean, because they're all counterintelligence agents, interrogators, and linguists. So, in the same battalion was our long-range recon airborne infantry, ranger guys. They had a fish jar full of rank that they were taking from their troops. The commander was, and I actually had to go on assignment with the other company commander, a friend of mine, Dennis Sullivan, that they made me go to the JAG office to visit him, for one of his visits for him. And I walked in and he's like, who are you? The lawyer's like, who are you? And he's like, this is Erik. This is the other company commander of that battalion. He goes, how come I've never seen you? It's like, because you've got airborne infantry guys versus counterintelligence agents. Who's going to wreck their career by, keeping a goat in their room or whatever these guys were doing.
Yeah, a lot of your guys, I imagine, had some serious intent when they joined the military. Yeah. They knew what they wanted to do.
Right.
A lot of those airborne infantry guys flying by the seat of their pants.
Right. So my warrant officers, a lot of them from a personality standpoint, I looked at, I dealt with them either like they used to be NCOs and they acted like NCOs, but then there was a group that they used to be specialists and they still acted like specialists.
Yeah.
And it just depended. It was, personality. It was wildly personality driven. So that was more of a culture shock than anything for me.
I can't imagine taking that company. That's
and it was middle of operations. I mean, I took command in the town of Lukovac at a chemical factory, and the very moment after I took command, we shut the whole operation down and moved to another base camp.
Oh wow!
On the first day, so it was quite the operation just to get things organized.
Certainly not boring.
No, not at all.
So, Erik, where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Plymouth, Michigan. I was I'm the youngest of three boys. My oldest brother is retired Marine Corps officer, lieutenant colonel, and He was involved in the Battle of Quashed in the First Gulf War. He was one of the 2 observation posts from the ANGLICO, which stands for Air Naval Gunfire Liaison Company. He was one of the 2 observation posts that was overrun by the Iraqi regiment when they made the incursion into Qafji in Saudi Arabia. So he was listed as missing in action for about 16 hours. But I think he actually had credit for about 125 vehicle kills, because he was the one calling for, he was the last person to call for a fire from the USS Wisconsin before it retired. And then he had a couple Cobra gunships that were watching his post, and most of the kills that they got were just guys that just got out of their vehicles and walked back, left the engines running. My middle brother is just retired after over 30 plus years in Uniform Division Secret Service. He is in the National Law Enforcement Hall of Fame for both taking on a riot single-handedly and then several life-saving awards. He's been in and around the streets of DC for his entire career, and he has probably seen more action, more violence, had active shooters targeting him than majority of the folks that actually joined the military and do 20 years.
Yeah, I kind of want to explore what your brothers did, but I'll save that for another time.
Yeah,
Maybe
well, I mean, that's
brothers.
and so you get as we're all cut of the same cloth, and my father was a teacher. He was in the Army during the Cold War, but he left. He grew up in Monroe, Michigan. He was born in a house on 2nd Street in Monroe. So he joined the Army. He married my mom, and they did a tour in Germany. But he got out after 5 years and became a school teacher. And my mom was a school teacher as well in Plymouth, Michigan. So one of the things that I remember that my dad taught the actor Tom Hulse in 7th grade English or social studies for his middle school. And Tom Hulse, he played Amadeus. He played in Animal House. His mom, still lives there. His mom and my mom are still friends. But it was that kind of a town. Plymouth was a very idyllic town for us to grow up in. But my dad, one of the things about him is that he never joined an organization that did not have to do with the family. He was a very strong, and I was brought up as a Christian Scientist. So right downtown Plymouth off of Ann Arbor Trail was the church. He was strong in the church. He was strong with our local Indian guide tribe, and the guys that we had in our Indian guide tribe was several families, several fathers and sons, sets of brothers, and we're all still friends. We all still could reach out to each other 50 some years later. It was that kind of upbringing, and he was pressured. He was pressured to try to join the Rotaries or the Kiwanis Club or whatever, and he just said, and he even got some criticism. And I remember him saying this, is that he was criticized that as at the time he was an elementary school principal after he had taught for a while. And one of the things, like, look, you're a community leader. You need to join these organizations. You need to contribute to society. And his answer was, I'm raising 3 boys. That's my contribution to society.
And he was an elementary school principal. Right.
So, and I still have friends that went to his school while he was principal, and he was an assistant principal at a middle school first. So he had been in the school system for quite a long time. And what I mean by, we had an idyllic life growing up. We did some, we didn't have a lot of money. Our summer vacations were going to historical places and camping. We'd go camp at a KOA campground. We dragged the camper. Poor mom had to put up with us. But, our summer vacations consisted of going to national parks. I think I went to every single Civil War battlefield and most of the American Revolutionary battlefields driving out of Michigan, except for a handful like Vicksburg or something that was just too far away. That's just what we could afford. So that's what we did. So the entire, part of the East, that was our summers, spending time doing that. But and even in our, we grew up in a decent neighborhood, but we had a lot that the backyard was so large that, the first thing my dad did was buy a wagon. And I don't mean just like a regular wheelbarrow or a pulley wagon. This was a true life-size Pioneer wagon with double axles, metal wheels, a hitch for the horse, the team of horses, and then off of that he built a tower with a rope ladder and a trap door and everything. And then the next thing he built was a fort in our backyard for us. And what I mean by forts, and you see a lot of the stuff in the catalogs today, that it's you see these little 5 foot by 5 foot towers with a slide off of it. My dad used telephone poles for the corners of the fort, and it was roughly a 20 by 20 platform that had a tent over top of it, a trap door, and it's all sandbox down below. And then on the second level, he placed a crow's nest, and it was as tall as our house, and our 2-story house. And there was no safety measures. We could slide down from a pole from there, and there was the sandbox was massive, but we were out there all summer, all day. In fact, my mom started throwing kids out of the yard at certain hours. She just couldn't take having a dozen kids over every day. So that was kind of our, we had an above ground pool. So we were constantly playing something adventures. Either we were a Civil War unit in our backyard. My mom filmed the Battle of Gettysburg. It was a reenactment when I was 6. We were all Civil War reenactors in the backyard that summer. That was like the summer of 71 or 72. We then filmed the Battle of Shiloh. It was just we were very well known with the kids in the neighborhood. They could see what we had. So we had kids. We had friends over all the time, and we were constantly doing just some wild stuff. It was, and then Dad would teach us. We even had the art of the Polish cannon, which you can't make anymore, but it consisted of stacking tin cans up and firing using lighter fluid in the bottom can, and then firing tennis balls out of the cannon. We had matches, we had fireworks, we had, good Lord, it's the cap guns, all that kind of stuff that you would never see in a kid's repertoire of mayhem, but we had it all. And so that was basically my childhood in a nutshell.
Yeah, well, and look, kids that grew up with a lot of money did not have the same kind of childhood you had.
Right.
I would argue your childhood was infinitely better than a rich kid's childhood.
It was amazing. And we did finally move to a larger house on the other side of the neighborhood. In fact, my dad hitched the wagon up to the car and dragged the wagon across town to our new house with this tower and everything else. I think it made the local paper. It was just quite the spectacle that this is what he was doing. Instead of just saying, I'll leave they will leave it here. But and everything, and my dad to make extra money as a teacher, he sold Kirby vacuums, and then he taught swim lessons. So, and my mom would make us go to swim lessons with him. So we were in the pool all, even in the winters, all weekend, all the time. So we all swam for the high school. We all swam for the same coach, Chuck Olson, who's had to be one of the most fantastic role models and mentors I could ask for outside of my father. And we all swam together. There was one year, my freshman year in high school, we had 7 sets of brothers on our team, and we were the only 3 brothers that were swimming all at the same time. And the other swim coaches would come up and be like, "Yeah, look, you're cheating with your roster. You got this kid Kleinsmith swimming 9 times." It's just, and every, swim meet, he had to come up. He goes, "Come here, line up. This is the oldest. This is the, the next one. This is the youngest." And he goes, "If you don't believe him, go ask the announcer," because my dad was the announcer. I mean, it was that's what I mean by Dad did everything for the family. And I set all that up because in the summer of 1982, between my sophomore and junior year of high school, my dad was killed. And he was still a runner. He picked it up from the Army, and he would run out of our neighborhood, go down the dirt roads, do a 3-mile loop. And a 17-year-old girl who was putting makeup on at the time, her car swerved over and hit him from behind, and she was going about 40 miles an hour. So he was in a coma for at least 3 weeks until he finally succumbed. And the life that I had came to an absolute screeching halt overnight. And it went from My brothers, my oldest brother went to the University of Michigan, so he was a freshman. My middle brother was going to Eastern Michigan University, and it went from our family, pretty much together in the house to overnight my mom and I living alone in this massive house, out in a wooded neighborhood, which the neighbors were farther away than a normal neighborhood. That was that was probably I have never gone through a harder test since then.
Losing an average father is one thing, and that's awful and tragic. But losing somebody as involved as your dad was, and having your two older brothers not in the house most of the year,
right?
That had to have changed you, I imagine.
It did, and it really tampered my outlook on. It was a struggle, and it got to the point where it was a religious struggle for me, where I had to, from my junior year in high school and senior year, I don't remember much other than it being dark the whole time. And part of it is, it's Michigan, it's between Detroit and Ann Arbor. But, when you swam after high school, you'd go to school in the dark, you'd swim after school, and then you come home in the dark. And then you come home to a relatively dark or quiet house with my mom there. And we all struggled differently, and we all handled it differently. My mom was told that her boys would never amount to anything because dad was such a strong role model, and that we would flounder somewhere in our life just in a horrible way. And she was just outright told that by folks that knew her in the town. So it was that kind of thing that then changed. So that's one of the reasons why we all joined the military, was that was one part of our father's life that we wanted to know more about, and we wanted to model ourselves like him. I mean, when somebody passes, they always become, if you adored whoever you lost, they always become perfect after you pass. You don't remember the faults and that kind of thing. But with my dad, there were very few. And that's part of why, besides patriotism, a sense of adventure, and all the other things that normal person has, that was the one driver that led us all to join the military. And again, whether it was the Marine Corps or the Army, and that, or anything else. And we kept that even after we all left the military, we kept that some degree of service or idea of service through our whole lives.
Why Army for you?
My big thing I wanted to do is I did want to join, be an intelligence officer. And I knew that from going through ROTC. I went to Purdue University. That was one thing, is like when I did go to college, I had to get out of the state. I wanted to go someplace a little bit farther away, and Purdue was just a perfect university to do that. And I adored my, all the years I had, and I struggled there with loneliness, depression. I had a lot of that, to fight while I was there, but it was a great environment to do that in. But part of what, I had always been, I liked the combat arms aspect, but I also liked the intelligence piece. And I got to back up a little bit. We were also massive gamers and role players. We played Dungeons and Dragons. We played Tunnels and Trolls. We played. I played my first hex encounter war game, true hard war game, when I was 8. My brother received this Avalon Hill game called Gettysburg, and it was squares and counters, but we quickly graduated and were just voracious in what we bought. Like our friends that had them, we would game with them, or we were always doing some sort of, painting miniatures and playing Dungeons and Dragons. And so that kind of critical thinking, that kind of wargaming stayed with me. So that was another reason of joining the military. But being an intelligence officer, largely that, I remember talking to my brigade commander after doing a rotation at Hohenfels in Germany, which is a training area. And he said, he goes, I got to tell you, you are really good at doing these templates on the enemy. Because there were a couple of times where I would write my template of how I thought the enemy was going to attack us, and the folks that were running the exercise swapped out the actual graphics for mine because they were so accurate. And they let the commander know that. And he goes, look, I haven't run into anybody who who can nail these guys as good as you. I was like, I've been doing this since I was 8 years old. You're just paying me.
Yeah, wow, that's I've been around a lot of Intel guys, and I've never heard of that.
Yeah, we were constantly doing that. I mean, there was also the love of history. So being stationed in Germany, my wife and I were we were out everywhere, going to every places. We got to the point where we just stopped going to cathedrals. Like friends would come by, it's like, hey, we want to go to the cathedral in Heidelberg. We want to go to the castle. I was like, man, we'll just wait in the car. I mean, we've been there so many times, but I dragged her to as many battlefields as I could. My kids now call it Dad's Obscure Tours. So now when we take our kids when they were growing up, we would do something fun, and we saved up for years, and we took our kids to Europe in 2013, and we went to all the touristy spots. We did, showed them where we lived. We went to Nuremberg, we went to Berchtesgaden, we went to Neuschwanstein Castle, and then we drove all the way through Switzerland and Paris, and then all of a sudden it's time for Dad to do his thing. So I took him out to Bastogne, and I took him out to the village of Foy, and I took him to the woods outside of the village of Foy and showed him the foxholes dug by the Band of Brothers because the foxholes were still there. Mm-hmm. I took him to Verdun. I made him go into Fort Douaumont, into the catacombs below the Fort Vaux, touring that one. And so my poor daughter's back in high school, and she's got a history teacher saying, yes, and this is what happened during World War I. And I'm sure none of you have been there. And she starts naming off all the places that she had been in high school. And she came home. She goes, my history teacher, wants to know why you like history so much. But that was it. It was being an intelligence officer was a great fit. I had always had an idea of being young and naive of wanting to join an agency or wanting to join the FBI or something like that. And it just, my path just took me in a different way. And, I have no regrets on everything I did, to include getting out of the Army before retirement. I left the Army at 13 years and 20 years as retirement. I left as an Army major. And, I fully believe that I received a sign from God that says, go do something else. And so that took my career, again, a different path as well.
What'd you end up doing right after you got out?
I became a contractor for a smaller company, a very small company called Cytex, which was then bought by a very tiny company called Lockheed Martin. But I ran training for the Army outside of the schoolhouse, and the Army does their intelligence training. If you're a new recruit, or if you're going to the large formal schools, like I had been, you go to Fort Huachuca, Arizona, which is just Sierra Vista, which is an hour east and south of Tucson. But outside of that, once you left the schoolhouse and you joined your unit, there was not a lot of training available. And so when I turned around, I had done some consulting work, but I was sent into my last duty station. I knew the folks that I was going to see at U.S. Army Intelligence and Security Command on Fort Belvoir, Virginia. It's just south of D.C. And I put in an unsolicited proposal. I was like, you seriously need a training program for these new data mining tools. And that's where, my experience from the Able Danger program and some other, my last job on active duty, I was the chief of intelligence for an organization called the Land Information Warfare Activity. It was the DoD Army and DoD's first data mining operation that was successful and successfully running. Because in my experience doing that, after I left, I just turned right around and said, you need people to teach your analysts these tools, to teach your analysts how to do analysis with these tools. More than just here's the what we call the buttonology or drive-by training, where an engineer would come by and says, here's how you do this and this and this. All right, see you later. And so the Army, and allocated us a bunch of money. So I hired 7 instructors, and we started work. And this was in 2002, shortly after 9/11. And by the time I had, I'll admit, by 2015, I had reached burnout stage, but I had grown that program to 154 instructors. And we were teaching tens of thousands of soldiers every year on our course, on different courses, sending mobile training teams all over the place, to include downrange, Iraq, Korea, Kuwait. And we were it got to the point though where it was too much for me to do, and I ran the program for 13 years straight.
Yeah, that's a long time. It sounds like growth is hard.
Yeah,
growth can be fun, but growth is hard.
Right.
I imagine you trained some of my soldiers.
I you know what, I trained I can't remember her name now, but Chelsea Manning, Bradley Manning. I trained Bradley Manning. We were joking about putting a picture up in our classroom saying he was our honor grad, but I trained him on counterterrorism analysis. And that was one of the courses I personally taught and designed was a counterterrorism analysis course. So that's, but again, it was, I've had so many people go through there, and that really became, and I took that from to every job after, the different jobs that I have after that. I took all that experience with me.
Well, you mentioned Able Danger. I imagine parts of Able Danger are still classified.
There are, but not. I mean, I can talk for days about it because I won't. I've talked about it enough that I won't breach any classified problems.
All right. So what I've read, and I have not done deep research certainly, and you were part of the Able Danger operation effectively before 9/11. And you tell me where I'm wrong here.
Mm-hmm.
We knew some of the bad guys, right?
Yep.
We had identified at least 3 terror cells, and we had names within those terror cells that were part of 9/11.
Right.
And you testified in front of Congress, right?
Twice. Yeah, twice. They this was a late in November 1999. We were approached by Special Operations Command, and they had heard of what we had done, and we had already done some significant projects from a data mining standpoint. We had mapped out how the Chinese and other adversarial countries were stealing technology, classified technology from us. We had done such a great job that it made it that project alone had made its way up to Capitol Hill. And we were constantly sending people up to Capitol Hill to brief staffers and congressmen and senators, because we were showing, essentially, we had mapped out how the technology was being stolen. And the two different ways that we were showing them was it was being stolen before it was classified. So it was being stolen either at a multinational corporation that was doing a partnership with a third party, and that third party had no security, and they were stealing the technology from them, or it was being stolen from a university, like the metallurgy. We highlighted the metallurgy department of Stanford University, which had, I think, 19 graduate students, of which 18 of the 19 were Chinese nationals. One of the students was a Russian, and he mysteriously had committed suicide halfway through the year that we were studying them. The biggest problem. So we came to the conclusion that we had something very powerful that nobody in DoD had, and we were able to do things faster and more efficient than a lot of the agencies, because just the agencies had their very archaic way of doing business at the time. And then this is 1999, 2000. So Special Operations Command had come to us and they said, we've been around to all the different agencies. We've been to the CIA, NSA, DIA, and we're asking them some very specific questions about how we can go after the Al-Qaeda organization. And this was after the Khobar Towers bombing, the attacks in Kenya and Tanzania. So they were building cases up, building a campaign for a while. And so we gave them our capabilities, and they invited me personally down to a working group with all the members. So they had somebody from every agency that, and when I mean down, it was at a local office in the Northern Virginia area. I don't want to talk about where it is, but and so I spent the morning listening to all these guys talk, and the official Osama bin Laden biography said, hey, you know what, this guy's going to die of pancreatic cancer. There's really nothing to worry about. He's not really that much of a threat. And the guy from Special Operations Command, a guy named Commander Scott Philpott, he tapped my shoulder and said, hey, let me see what you guys can do. So I called back to a warrant officer that I had that was working it, as well as a civilian. And I just said, look, I need you to run this data. I need you to do a quick search. Call me back. She goes, I'll send you something in 90 minutes. And so she sends me something. We essentially, within 90 minutes, they had mapped out kind of the major muscle groups of Al-Qaeda worldwide, the presence of Al-Qaeda worldwide. And we showed them these major areas. And of course, when we briefed it, that we had a lot of naysayers from the other agencies. They just said, look, we know all this. You're not showing us anything that we don't know. And I was like, right, but we started 90 minutes ago and we're already caught up. That we've already has what we have called the intelligence preparation of the battle space. We've already mapped them out because we're using data mining tools, and we had people and we had the right processes in place. We could do it faster and more efficient, and then we had a different start point. And that's when Special Operations Command was like, all right, I'm going to go with you guys. You're it. And so I'm going to give you your first requirement, first tasker. And the tasker was as broad as find Al-Qaeda worldwide, go. And that's what we did. And so we just started working. We started working the tools. We started building association matrices and diagrams. We started putting charts together. We started databasing. And today's standards, it doesn't seem like a lot, but we were pulling in about 2.5 terabytes worth of data, straight data that we were pulling in. Well, we had mapped out major areas in Europe. We had mapped out major areas in Northern Africa, what's called the Maghreb Arab portion of Northern Africa. We were finding, obviously, connections to other terror groups in the Middle East, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Yemeni Islamic Jihad. Then we found ties to organizations in the Far East, the Abu Sayyaf and Jama'at Islamiyah, two groups out of the Philippines. And so we were mapping these out. What really bothered us is we started finding places in the U.S. With hits. So we saw a hit in Florida. Then we saw the New Jersey, and it wasn't the entire cell in New Jersey. We started coming up with names. What bothered me the most personally is that I saw a hit for the tool said there is some presence through connection A, B, and C in your hometown of Plymouth, Michigan. Mm. And that's when it kind of hit me. And it was, and again, we didn't vet, we didn't have time to vet it. This was a, mile wide, inch deep type of a look. But when you're finding your, places where you grew up, where there's probably a presence, and I think it was like a person that was associated with the, through different degrees of separation that was using funding for, was helping to funnel money into the organization. The problem we ran into is because we were data mining, data mining sucks up like a vacuum. And so we were bringing in information, that was also coming in with information about U.S. persons. For the military, it is illegal to deliberately collect on U.S. persons unless you have a specific set of rules that you have to follow. And there has to be a counterintelligence purpose or a direct threat. And but the problem is when you're using these tools, it was collecting all that kind of information incidentally. And so the lawyers at DOD, somebody found out about it, and so they came down. First they said, we're going to have a lawyer. We're going to slow the way you're doing business, and we're going to make it so inefficient that you really can't even use the tools. And then they just came down and just said, all right, you're shut down until we can figure out what's going on. Well, one of the regulations that we had to follow, even though it was written in 1987 or whatever, is we're only allowed to keep the data that we had collected for 90 days. So as the lawyers and the commanders and the directors and, the chiefs, from between the Pentagon and our organization, we're going back and forth, the 90-day mark hit. And I was required to delete all the data that we had collected. And so I even had the lawyer come in, Tony Gentry, is a friend of mine. He said it kind of jokingly. He's like, look, you need to delete all this data. Remember, or if you don't delete it by today, you're going to jail. And, so we had some really deep moral, we talk about morals. We talk about doing the right thing in the Army. We have, there's classes, there's training. I think that was one of the most difficult moral problems that we had to face. And we came up with a decision, or, ethically, we had to delete it. And we did. And it was horrible to do that because we had base camps in Afghanistan. We had locations in the U.S. I mean, we were digging more and more into it to map these guys out. And I deleted every piece.
So, Erik, what's the basis of the 90-day rule from the 87?
If you're doing collection on a U.S. person, whether it's incidental or not, you're only allowed to retain that data for 90 days until you can make a decision on it that says this is viable to a legitimate investigation. Like you have certain, certain articles on criteria on how you can keep it, but you have to evaluate that data. Well, we had 2.5 terabytes of data, and we weren't allowed to touch it because they had shut us down. So it's not that we could just go through and start culling stuff out manually. It was just we weren't even allowed to look at the database, and we just had to press the button and delete it all.
So if lawyers didn't exist,
right,
and politicians didn't exist, do you think we could have prevented 9/11?
I firmly believe we could. I mean, I look at it more and more. When I testified, and I just say, I can't speculate to either way whether we could. But after 20 years and seeing more and more of the effects, of how things have changed, I think we probably could have had some sort of effect to disrupt their operation.
Yeah, it seems almost. I mean, and I get trying to protect. Well, the irony is the USA Patriot Act went farther than anything you guys were collecting.
Right. Well, that yes and no, because one of the things one of the myths about the Patriot Act is it fosters collaboration between organizations. That's not really true. It's a one-way door. So it built pipelines so that folks in intelligence could send their information to law enforcement agencies, but that there was no reciprocity. There was no door that allowed law enforcement that was doing collection from a crime standpoint to send that back over to the intelligence guys. So we were still dead in the water, even after. I mean, we had information that could have warned the USS Cole about the attack off of the coast of Yemen. In fact, I'm friends now with the commander, Kirk Lippold, of the ship. We just got together for lunch last week, and we've been comparing notes ever since. And this is what I was doing. This is what you were doing, and it was just it's monumentally frustrating. So 9/11 hits, and it's just a hard day. When the first time I had to go testify was in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee. It was in September of 2005. And that's after one of the members of our team, Tony Schaefer, and you see him on Fox News every so often. He runs a nonprofit organization, but Tony was our liaison to the DIA. Was instrumental in getting us data that we absolutely needed. And then on the weekends for his reserve duty, he was helping our team do an analysis. So he blows the whistle, and so I walk into work, and I tell this to anybody who's in intelligence, the day a 60 Minutes producer calls you and wants to do an interview is not a sign of success in the world of intelligence. So, but I sat down with both the guys, and it was they were working for Bernard Shaw, and they were going to do an entire expose on what we had done, but what really got was when I finally had to go up to Capitol Hill, and I briefed a lot of the staffers. But when I had to go testify the first time, DOD had put everybody on a gag order, except for myself, because I was no longer associated with DOD. So Tony Schaefer was not allowed to brief. One of the contractors was not allowed to testify. So I was really the lone witness for the first run. And Arlen Specter was the senator. President Joe Biden was there as a senator. John Kyle, a couple of others. But as I walked into the room, and it was packed wall to wall. I mean, every seat taken, standing room only. And I had to ask the staffer that I was with, it's like, well, God, who knows about this? Who are all these people? And he said, look, this is about a third of this room is going to be filled with the media. That's just a given. A third of the room is the other staffers that other congressmen sent. Say, hey, go sit on this and take notes. And then the last third are the families of the victims of 9/11. Have fun. Good luck. And that was again, another moment. It was like, just, you remember the emotional periods. That was just one of those, I just felt horrible. And I went right and sat down and started my testimony. Similar what happened when in a few months later, we testified again in front of the House Armed Service Committee. And then I could sit with Tony Schaefer and the contractor that we were working with. And that's where I met Kirk Lippold, because afterwards he introduced himself. And as soon as I realized who he was, I apologized to him. I just said, look, we failed you. I've never had to say that I've failed somebody so miserably with real world intelligence, with the loss of life. But I said, but I feel like I failed you. And he goes, you didn't fail me. He said, everybody up here failed us. He goes, it's I'm glad that you were here, and we've been friends ever since.
Yeah, I've been inside the Army, and I know how the federal government works at some level. Yeah. It is bureaucratic. It is unemotional, and it is swayed by the politics of the silly at times. And so I guess for me, as an American citizen, I'd love to think that sort of silliness, frankly, would never happen again. Do you think that level of political, legal silliness would allow us to make a similar mistake?
Yes, it's inescapable. I mean, with the size of organization you're dealing with, it's inevitable, and it's not because I'm not an anti-government conspiracy theorist or anything like that, but it's going to happen. I mean, I've seen some. And anybody that retires from the military, that's why these guys have such great war stories. If you want to talk to anybody who's been in the military, just some of the craziest stuff that you've seen happen has happened. So it's from the tactical level all the way to the senior level. And I'm right now I work for a great company called SOS International. We do defense contracting. We have linguists. We do intelligence work. We do base operations. We do IT work. And so I'm still exposed. I'm still in the community, so to speak. And you still learn about things like that even going on. And you just thank God. You're just like, man, I can't believe this agency is doing this. And it's inescapable. It's just going to happen.
Yeah, it's I don't know how to feel about that. I mean, and I understand. I would have answered the same way. Of course, you're much more of an expert than I am on that. So you're a history buff. What did you teach at American Military University?
I didn't teach. I was actually doing business development. So one of the roles that I did when I left Lockheed, I went to American Military University, and I'm a graduate from there. So I got my master's degree in strategic intelligence from them. But I was on their board of advisors, helping develop their curriculum for years when I was at Lockheed. It was just something I did on the side. And they brought me on board to foster partnerships with the different agencies and different parts of the intelligence community, so that we could, for example, there's every major intelligence agency has a schoolhouse that's attached to it. They all train their own people, and so it was going into those different schoolhouses and trying to get academic credit. AMU was the largest. It's really the largest form of higher education, and for a while in the world, for intelligence students. I mean, at one point there was something alone. They had 9,000 students several years ago, but it was between intelligence, national security, homeland security, and cyber. They had 9,000 students. That's a huge. There's some colleges that aren't even that large, and that was just just these couple of programs. So that was my role there, and I started writing articles for the school blog. And by writing articles, I was then approached and said, hey, would you write a book for us? And this was Cognella Publishing reached out to me. And I was like, I've actually been working this and I've got most of the notes from the classes that I've taught. And so it was only natural to write the book that I wrote that came out in 2020. In fact, I just signed a contract with them for a second edition. Oh, so nice. We're kicking that. In fact, our kickoff is tomorrow where we start talking about that one. And I tell you, it was going to work at AMU during the day, coming home and writing all night. And, that's, I think I want to estimate it's about for an academic textbook standpoint, about 2,000 hours that I had to put into it to get it done. And an academic textbook, it's not going to get you're not writing it for money. You're writing it to put your imprint on the students as far and wide as you can. So and basically the book is called Intelligence Operations, Understanding Data, Tools, People, and Processes. And when you look at all the literature that's out for their intelligence, there's stuff about spies and spying. That's fun stuff to read. There's the books about the intelligence agencies, the organizations, and things like that. There's books about analysis. And then there's a group of books called I call them the I Was There book. And it was, I did a tour here, or I did, from a Vietnam vet or somebody in the Iraq War or Afghanistan or whatever. And those are great books, but they have a very myopic viewpoint because it's one person just saying, hey, this is what I did. There's really nothing out there outside of the most boring doctrinal, that you could read that just really talked about to students and to learners and intel is like, I know how to do analysis. I know how to use this tool. I have no idea how I'm supposed to run this entire shop or run my organization. And that came from, as I was training for the Army intelligence analysts, we started getting approached by corporations to train their intelligence analysts. Only they didn't want to call them intelligence analysts. They called them security professionals or whatever. So we ended up training entire groups. We trained folks from Disney. We trained folks from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Target, the chain of stores, has about 60 analysts. And they all do the same thing. They're protecting their secret sauce. They're protecting their executives for foreign travel and any threats to the organization. And then they're also doing intelligence, looking at hot spots around the world. It's like, look, we have assets here. We have people. We have stores. We have restaurants or whatever. I mean, we train folks from Yum Foods. They're the parent company for Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, KFC. And they all have a reason for corporate security. They all have their own intelligence folks. We started training them. And that's why one of the reasons why I wrote the book was not only from an academic standpoint, but really to sit as a guide for somebody just like, look, I need to deal with what are the right people that I got to have in here? What are the skill sets? What's the importance of diversity not from a racial standpoint or a male female standpoint, but I need diversity in terms of background, schools of thought. I need a SIGINT person who's hardwired for data, and then I need a more of a human intelligence person who can do analysis on people and individuals and that kind of thing. And so you got to put those folks together. And all those things I try to address as really as a desk side reference more than anything else.
Did you enjoy the process of writing?
Yeah. And sometimes yes, and sometimes no. I guess anybody who there's sometimes I would just struggle on a single paragraph, and then you make your breakthrough, and then boom, you're running through the rest of the chapter and everything flows perfectly. I mean, and I'm doing that now, and I'm writing fiction on the side. And it's exactly the same. It's just less, obviously less research, but that you can struggle all day on just getting a conversation down, and then everything flows. You break that log jam, and then everything flows for a while, and then you hit your next log jam. That's just the way it goes. That's when people give up.
Yeah, it's probably a lot like working out and trying to improve your strength. You end up plateauing at certain levels, and
right. And you got to make time for it, just like working out as well.
All right, so you were recruited to be part of Case Breakers, and I am fascinated by everything I've read online about it.
Yeah.
Do you spend a lot of time each week on it?
It comes and goes. It depends on what we're working and what's going on. I mean, for the Cooper case, I was approached in 2011. I started, and the guy who approached me was Tom Colbert, our team lead, and I had met him through a joint friend that we had, a gal named Shannon Rossmiller. And Shannon Rossmiller was a wonderful individual. I met her and this all came out of my test when I testified the first time. The lawyer that was offered to represent me and sat next to me during the first testimony was a guy named Mark Zaid. He's a friend of mine now. He's also the lawyer for the Ukrainian whistleblower that caused the impeachment against Trump a few years ago. Yeah. But Mark Zaid introduced he introduced me to Tom Colbert. I think we were actually up on Capitol Hill having lunch, and we met each other. But I was doing just pro bono, just advisory work on the side. I get calls every so often from friends like, "Hey, can you help me with some problem set?" And I just do it. It's just fun to do. And he finally called me up, and I was in the middle of a proposal that I was working for Lockheed, and he just said, "Look, I got a guy that I want you to I need help going after." And I said, "What's his name?" He goes, "Oh, it's DB Cooper." It's like, I thought he was dead. And the folks that are in the room around me, they just start they're looking at me like, "Who's this guy talking to?" But that was our start. And we started working the case, and Tom's done so much legwork on it. And what I did is as I approached it from the intelligence standpoint. So I was doing a lot of the analysis on that. I had access to some data mining tools and some visualization tools. So he dumped off a 70-page dossier that he had built on the guy we believe was DB Cooper, Robert Rackstraw. And he said, the problem was, look, I'm having a problem. Nobody's reading this. I'm putting it out on desks, at the bureau. I'm putting it at the police stations, and nobody's going to read it. It's like, I wouldn't read it, but I'm your friend. And I said, let me put it in a visualization. So pictures, picture will say 1,000 words. So we made this chart, and it became known as the Cooper chart. And that all of a sudden, it just because we did that, it marketed our case in a much more stronger fashion. So we started getting traction from folks that were coming forward. It's like, you know what, I really want to help you with this. Here's another piece. Here's something else. And so that allowed Tom to then, he wrote a book, the Last Master Outlaw. It's an award-winning book that he had put together with Tom Zalazzi. And it was just a great way of showing that intelligence can do work. We can adjust the same methods that we use for, normally intelligence is a predictive tool. Our job that's different than law enforcement. Law enforcement goes to a crime scene and says, all right, here's all the data and this is what happened. The intelligence person is supposed to look at that same data and says, all right, here's what's going to happen in the future in a nutshell. So, but the same methodologies were complementary. So we started working some of those areas, and that opened up the first documentary they did for the History Channel, which really we were really unhappy with, just because it was a two-parter. In the last 15 minutes, they kind of went after all the data and just kind of queered the entire investigation, and probably not to get sued because Rackstraw was still alive. In fact, he did sue because he sued us for attempted murder because he had a heart attack after that first piece, and we left him alone. I mean, there are some videos of Tom doing a cold approach, and we actually showed him the chart. He's just sat there and plugged through it and verified the chart. But that one case, I mean, we recently came out with a Netflix series. That was a 4-parter that came out over the summer, or this last summer. And what was interesting about that one is that they spent the first episode. Again, it was a great director, producer. They were fantastic. But I must have interviewed like 3 or 4 hours with it. But they did the first episode kind of saying this is what the case was, and then the second episode we presented who we thought was the guy. But then the third and the fourth episode were the different naysayers that came and shot holes in their investigation, saying, hey, these guys didn't do this, they didn't do this, here's the problem. And what got me was that none of them had their own solution. They just knew that ours wasn't right. And that was a point where it was frustrating to watch. But then I finally realized that everybody that's shooting holes in our argument has a financially vested interest in this case never being solved. So they have the guy that ran the CooperCon in Oregon or Washington State. You had the guy who ran the D.B. Cooper podcast. You had an author of a D.B. Cooper book. We were disinvited from CooperCon because the little boy who dug up the 250 thing, or I can't remember how much money he found on the banks of on the side of the river. He said, if these guys come, I'm not coming. You're not going to have me as a guest. And Tom was pretty upset. It's like, Tom, why would this convention want us to show up to say you don't need this convention anymore? We've solved it. So again, when you watch that series in that light, it makes a heck of a lot of sense. For everybody's got their own agenda. Our only agenda was we wanted to solve. I've been paid a dime for it. It's just something fun that I like to do on the side and help Tom out or whatever. Tom's vested. Tom's gone in the hole. Tons of money that he's invested into it. So I'd like to see him recover that at a minimum. But again, we've picked up other cases. We picked up the Zodiac killer. We've picked up a tip off on a Jimmy Hoffa location, and that's been pretty wild to work. Then the most depressing one though is the Atlanta child murders case, because we got a tip off on that one, and if everybody remembers that from early 1979, 1980, there was 26 young black males that were killed in and around the Atlanta area. The guy that is in jail for it, Williams, he was only indicted for 2 of the murders. And so after he was thrown in jail, they closed up shop and said, yep, we found the guy, that's it. And then the other 24 families no longer have closure. So these families, even years and 42 years later, they're still suffering from the effects of that. They never really found out what happened to their child. And that one, as we dug deeper and deeper in it, I mean, Jimmy Hoffa, we got that disappearance. Again, I grew up outside of Detroit, so they actually went to my dad's school and searched the cars from a tip-off to the trunks of the cars to see if his body was in there. I still remember that as a child.
Wow.
But the the Cooper case, nobody died. The Zodiac killer case, was several murders that were horrific, but then the guy stopped, at a certain point. This one, it's almost like nobody really wanted to solve it once they found this guy. And then the more and more we dug into it, the more we found that it's probably not one person, that it was more than one. And we're at the point where we actually have somebody who disappeared on us, and we may have a fugitive case involved with this as well. And this is a 42-year-old case.
Yeah. So that perpetrator, if they're guilty, they've got to, well, guilty or not, they've got to be at least in their 60s, right?
Yep. Yeah. I mean, that's exactly, that's the thing. And even the families, I mean, the guy who committed the murder, I think it was Walter Williams. I want to remember his first name correctly, but he's actually
Wayne Williams.
Wayne Williams. I'm sorry. You're right. He's calling into the family support groups that are still taking place. And he's calling in and said, look, I didn't do it. Of course he's in jail for it, but what we think is that he was probably just one person of a ring, and his job was to either dispose of the bodies or help recruit the kids or something like that. He may not have even have done any of the murders. He may not have even, it's just gotten more and more detailed, and just gotten more, you get into the point. I even had, I called up an interrogator of mine who's a friend now, and I asked her if we had ever had a chance to go interview Williams, could you do it as an interrogator? She's like, yeah, I'd do it. And then she started looking into the case and called me back 2 weeks later. She goes, I'm having PTSD. I can't do it.
Wow.
It's affecting me too much. And I was like, yeah, well, it's affecting all of us. We're having a tough time with this one. So, but the other ones, it's just, we're doing some really crazy stuff with the Hoffa case, and we got a tip off on that location. And the location that we found, or that we were, I had to do some imagery analysis comparing photos of overhead images and maps, overlaying them on top of each other to try to pinpoint the location, because where they think he's buried has been changed radically. And we got to the point where we hired a ground positioning radar team to go out to the location. It's paved over, and we dressed them up in I think they went to Staples and got some like construction gear or whatever, so it looked like they were city workers, so we wouldn't get any issues in the location they were at. And they came back and said, look, everything that when you pinpointed the entire area where you said to look is hard packed clay, at least 12 feet down, except for the specific area that Erik said that were if he was buried, it was going to be in that location. So that's one that, nobody wants to open up another Al Capone's vault, but that one, even if nothing was there, the entire story is a fantastic story as we're laying these out of us doing this investigation. It's just such a great thing. It's such a great thing to be involved with and to go after. And that's why, again, my poor kids are just like, Dad's talking to this, Tom's calling Dad. We worked at night. He's like, man, it's just some of the wildest conversations I'm overhearing. Some of the stuff that you're saying, you're talking to each other about. It's just, he was like, I would not know it unless I knew you were my dad. So,
a couple of quick hit questions on each one of these. Yes, so, DB Cooper, how confident are you that Rackstraw was DB?
Oh,
Cooper?
I'm at the point now, and I joke about it, but it's like, look, if he didn't do it, OJ did it. I mean, we had 180 pieces of evidence that we submitted to the FBI and never heard a thing. We had his DNA that we submitted. We had his back, his family members talking about, just look, he's probably the guy. And the biggest thing was like that really keyed it in was that this guy's entire life had been one grifting operation after another. From the time he was a helicopter pilot in Vietnam, on the side started flying for Air America, which is a CIA operation for resupply. And then we think that he flew for around the agency again. And so when the Bureau, we always get our man. When the Bureau finds and they find their man, they run into the CIA, and the CIA is like, look, you can't touch him. He's ours. Not till we can declassify what, the work that he had done with it. And he wasn't an agent or anything who was properly trained. He was just an asset they relied upon to do, to do flights for him. And so that's one part of that, the DB Cooper documentary. They brought in Joanna Mendez, who was the chief of disguise for the CIA. And I know Joanna. I met her several times. Great gal. And she's basically said, look, he couldn't be CIA because he doesn't talk like CIA. and I was like, but he wasn't. He was a pilot. That's what he did. He sold tile on the side. We've got so many other goofy things. I mean, he was in Iran before the revolution. As soon as he came back, he was arrested on, oh God, I can't remember the other charges. I mean, and then he faked an illness and an injury where he had to show up in court in a wheelchair when he was, it was a complete fabrication of his physical state. So there's just, so many different things. And we got to the point where we're tying him as a murder suspect and to his stepfather. His body was found in a shallow grave near his property, sometime after. So he was being looked at for so many different things. This Cooper thing fits his MO because it was just one chapter of so many different things that he was involved with. I mean, his first wife called him his nickname for his first wife was Bullshit Bob. Because she said, like, I never believed anything he said.
Did she have that nickname before they got married?
No, I don't know. But again, it's, he fits. I mean, we brought in folks, we brought in forensic experts, we brought in behavioral profilers. I mean, he fits the mold of a narcissistic sociopath, where if he's talking to you, he's trying to manipulate you. I mean, that was just his MO over and over and over. So
you had mentioned with the Zodiac killer, the guy you believe was the Zodiac killer, he stopped and he lived for quite some time afterwards. Yeah. Why did he stop?
He got married.
Wow.
The guy's name was Gary Francis Post. And one of the things that we had tagged him with is that he was an Air Force mechanic. He had a special pair of boots called wing walker boots that the Air Force mechanics used. And that was present at some of the crimes. We have, right now we're at the point where we're seeking aid to get ballistic studies. We have shell casings from the weapons he had owned. These crimes were committed with a 9mm Luger and a .22. We have 9mm and .22 shell casings from his house. We have other DNA evidence, so we're trying to get those tested. It does, obviously, that costs money, which our group doesn't have. But one of the things we found with his pattern, and we have him tied to some murders we're looking at that weren't really originally attached to him. There were some other murders that were committed before 1966. And but where we think he stopped is that he did get married, and he married into a mother and he had an instant stepson who was a teenager, and he became a mentor for that boy and his friends, kind of like he formed his own posse of folks that he had almost complete control over. And so that became his new outlet of controlling them in that way. So you see with the a psychological profile of him is he tended to tie people up or just to attack couples or whatever. But that was part of his being in control from a psychological standpoint, killing the cab driver, that kind of thing. And so once he had somebody he could permanently be in control, and this is just I'm not a psychologist, but this is just my own assessment belief, is that the killing stopped because he had a radical change to his own lifestyle.
So Rackstraw not being arrested and convicted, I get the whole thing with the CIA.
Yeah.
But did San Fran PD or whatever the jurisdiction was that should have been investigating and eventually arresting him, did they just not have the resources to do what you guys have done?
Well, here's the thing with the FBI, the same team that was investigating him, and this is, they had folks in the 70s. I mean, they had identified him in 77 and 78, and then the trail went cold. And that's, and part of as soon as we ran into the possibilities, like, look, we're getting into some classified areas, we stopped. We made a conscious effort, like, look, we're not digging into this. This is, we are investigators, but we're not leaking any classified information. We're not going to cause any disruption. We're not going to, we're patriots first, so we're not going to do that. And so we stopped on him. But we, for the Bureau and for their, the agents that have to work the group that was investigating a lot of these cold cases are the same groups that are in charge of missing and exploited children. What's your priority? An active case of a missing child, or some old fart who didn't kill anybody, only ransomed $250,000, parachuted out, nobody saw him again, nobody was killed, nobody was hurt. is that your priority, or is it a more urgent case, with a child?
Yeah.
That's easy to answer.
Yeah. Super easy. So Atlanta murders, the child murders, and they were mostly under 18 is my recollection.
Yeah.
What's the working theory if there's a group that is in some sort of enterprise? What was the enterprise? Do you guys have theories about that?
We do. I don't want to get into that one because that one's still kind of active. We do believe that. I mean, we had a witness that says they were shown one of the bodies, and it was we believe the one body that they found was the one body that they never found because it disappeared after that. But the witness that came forward to us was either 10 years old or 13 years old at the time. We're investigating into that piece. One of the members who we think was in cahoots with Williams ended up dying in jail himself several years later. So there's so many dead ends to this, and there's so many unanswered variables that were added in there. Not to mention any problems of a racial aspect that is tied into that. I mean, it's, Williams is African American. One of the other folks that we're looking at is also. There is another person that we have witness statements and images, but as a white guy, that was probably a friend. And so it's, we're not trying to solve it from anything other than, one, we want to solve the case, and two, we still want to help these families out. I mean, and that's the thing. It's like, if I don't make a dime off of it, I don't care. I mean, who cares? I'd rather, if that's the way, like my father, he's raising 3 boys. I mean, I raised 2 kids. But now that they're grown out of the house, this is what I want to do to help other folks. Yeah,
you're turning over stones that you and the team are turning over stones that have not been turned over before. Do you worry about personal safety at all?
Yes and no. I mean, a lot of these cases are so old, they're not even really cold cases anymore. They're historical cases. I mean, good Lord, Rockstar, it was 50 years. I mean, the dude was working in a shipyard. He's not going to do anything at that age. Same, with Hoffa, that case again is so old that most of the witnesses are not even alive. Also, in fact, the group that we're looking at, there's not a single person that's alive that was involved with it. And talking to a friend of mine in the bureau, he finally came. He finally gave me. He goes, "Let me just give you a tip. The guys who killed Hoffa don't know where he's buried. You know who knows where he's buried? The guys who buried him know where he's buried, and that's it. That's the tip off that we received was from somebody who was involved with that, who says he was involved with that portion. And he's no longer alive anyway. So we're going through a family member.
Do you find it exhilarating to do this kind of work?
It's more of, I mean, as an intel analyst, it's more of that kind of thing. I'm still a huge gamer, so I get we get our fixes in certain ways. Some people like doing, skiing and driving cars and that kind of thing. I am a huge gamer. I'm more of a nerd than Henry Cavill is. I play Warhammer 40K. I have the miniatures. I have thousands of miniatures down in my basement. I've played every kind of, boardgamegeek.com is one of my favorite websites. So I'm doing the board games, I'm doing the miniatures, I'm doing online gaming. All of that piques a strategy and problem solving that's part of your hobby and just the enjoyment of it. This is one of those things. The trend now of escape rooms, folks like going to there because they like solving problems. It's similar to that. It's like, look, you're just going to get a scant piece of information. Let's start digging in and see what we can find.
It's a great answer. I'm going to totally change speeds on you and ask a question that we ask most of our guests towards the end. All right, you're a talk show host, one time only. You get to invite 3 or 4 guests. The 4th guest depends on whether you like the kind of guest that I'll ask you about. So your 4 guests are 1 male, 1 female, 1 musical act, and then if you're in the stand-up comedy, a stand-up comedian, these guests can be alive or dead. They can be famous or not famous, personal relationship with you or not.
Right.
Literally anybody you can try. You can go for entertainment. You can go for thought provoking. You can go for whatever you want to go for because it's your one-time show. Who are your guests?
Well, I mean, I think for a band, I've only been to one concert in my entire life, and it was the Police Synchronicity Tour in 1983 or something like that. But my band would be Rush. I would invite the members of Rush to sit with them because, and part of it is just the way, Neil Peart, although he left us in 2020, was his lyrics. I mean, obviously he was touched by a lot of the same things that I was growing up with role playing and the Lord of the Rings and historical, classical fantasy novels, things like that. For the what was the other one? Was it a male and a female?
Male, female, and then stand-up comedian if you are into.
Stand-up comedian is easy. Jerry Seinfeld. I mean, he's kind of like his dry humor has been my set of humor, immensely. I mean, just fantastic. He had the series, Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee. I'd love to do that. I don't drink coffee, but whatever, that would be a great hangout. Male and female, I mean, I would always lean toward historical figures. So I would say from a female standpoint, I am very big into medieval. I would love to sit with Joan of Arc, and I think as a historical figure to really understand, her vision, what she saw. I mean, I am fairly religious with from my upbringing. All of my brothers, since my father passed away, we all took the religion of our spouses. So I converted to Catholicism when my daughter went through her confirmation. And then I think the male, it's a bad answer, but if I could have an hour to sit down with somebody, I would do anything to sit down with my dad for another hour.
That's a fantastic answer.
And then aside from him, it would be honestly I'm looking at a portrait of him right here in front. On the other side of my office is George Washington. I mean, just to pick their brain and understand them. There's so many folks that I would just love to sit with. I mean, just from a tactical standpoint, if I could sit with Napoleon Bonaparte, I would. There's so many folks that when you read about them, you want to know everything that there is about them. Their thought processes. All of that. Martin Luther. There's just everything in between. But almost everyone is somebody who had an effect, somebody who had a test, and somebody who had to overcome that.
Yeah, those are the most intriguing historical people, and certainly the most interesting from my perspective. Like it's true for you as well. Sure. Look, can we close with you telling me about your family, your immediate family?
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, I live in Northern Virginia. The great thing about it is, like, when I settled here out of the Army, and as soon as I did, I called my mom from Michigan, and she moved 5 blocks down the street. And then my other brother, my middle brother, when he was in Secret Service, he moved into the neighborhood. And then my oldest brother was in the Marine Corps station at the Pentagon. In fact, on 9/11, my brother was in the wedge that was hit. He was just in the inner ring, so the plane never made it to him. And my middle brother was at the White House working, and that was one of the targets. So we have been fortunate to live within a mile of each other. My mom finally moved to the Villages in Florida. There's some wild stuff going on down there, let me tell you. But it is great that our cousins and our nephews could all grow up next to each other, as brothers and sisters. My son is a graduate student at Georgetown. He's trying to get his master's and PhD in pharmacology. My daughter is entering a nursing school here in Northern Virginia. She is the only girl in our family in 60 years. So my mom only had boys. My brother only has boys. I finally had a girl. I was like, oh, any Kleinsmith can have a boy. It takes a little bit of effort to have a girl, but she's the only girl, and I feel for her because it's all the family gets together. It's all the boys doing boy stuff, and then my wife is a librarian for a middle school out in Fauquier County. Okay. And just loving what she's doing. We're at a point in our life where we are, the amount of time, again, our volunteerism turned into time. We've done everything from Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts. I used to go into the high school before COVID, our local high school, I used to teach military history to all the ninth graders. And in the fall, and I would use miniatures to do it. So the fall, I would teach the Battle of Kadesh between the Pharaoh Ramses Egyptians and the Hittite Empire. And then in the spring, I would go back and I would teach the Battle of Agincourt. And at that battle, they knew who was there by name. So I would hand out cards to the students as they came in. They'd have to find out by the end of the class whether they lived, died, or were captured or whatever. And so, I mean, that's just, I love doing that. And so it's, COVID really killed a lot of those efforts. But again, in a nutshell, that's what we do. It's like my wife says I have 4 jobs. I have my regular day job. I have the book that I'm rewriting. I have the fiction book, and then I have the cold case work. And if I'm not doing that, I'm spending time with her, or I'm being a gaming nerd.
You have a busy, sounds like rich life.
I appreciate it. Well, thank you. It's it's not always been pretty, but I just thank God that I'm here where I am now.
Well, Erik, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. I'm grateful to Pete for hooking us up.
Sure.
And I would love it. Can you hang on for a second after I stop the recording?
Yeah, absolutely. And anybody can, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Twitter. If they got any other questions, they want to just hit me directly, that's fine.
Oh, that's awesome.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to wherever you listen to podcasts. We'd also really appreciate if you'd rate and review us. You can find us at scodupodcast.com.